Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Kidarkenu Bakodesh. I'd like to start tonight with a beracha. I'll tell you the truth. I can't think for a moment of a greater blessing in the home of a Jew than his shalom bayit. And when that blessing is there, it is the mikor of all the blessings that emanate and come out of that home. So how are we going to open up tonight? We got to open up with a beracha. There's no other way to do this. So let's start. Kidarkenu Bakodesh, Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Shahakol Nihiya Bidvaro. Do you remember that incredible moment? We had the butterflies, and we were thinking, could this really be it? Yeah, I've been dating for so long. I've been wondering when that day is going to come. So many of my friends already were engaged and now married, and now it might be my turn. And we start to think, we start to pinch ourselves. Is this real? Is this really me? Did my day finally come? This is the day that I finally met the one I'm going to spend a lifetime with. And then the first thing a guy starts thinking, how am I going to propose? You know, we're in the moment. We feel a very closeness to Borei Olam. We can't believe that this is real. It's surreal. And then we start going off on tangents. How am I going to propose? As if that's a very important point. Everybody had their little cute way of coming forward with a proposal, and he knows how to do it. He knows how to do the impossible in the most impossible ways. He knows how to take a young man and a young lady and bring them together in ways that only the greatest of the great, only Borei Olam knows how to be the great shadchan of the world. And although maybe our story and your story and my story wasn't dramatic like this one that I just described, but you should know that your story wasn't less divine than the story I just told you. It was the same Borei Olam who brought the two random of the same guy and girl together in ways that we just didn't see coming. And he made the match. And he brought us together. And he brought a bond between us that only Kudsha Berichu could pull off. And it's because of that that I open with a tremendous question. Why is our marriages compared to Kriyat Yamsuf? I mean, you know, a marriage is a bond. We're bringing people together and we're comparing it to something that's split. Isn't that a little bit odd? Wouldn't you look at marriage if I had to bring you some sort of a mashal, some sort of a paradigm, something to describe the bond of bringing two forces together and making it so tight and so perfect and so one, and yet it's always compared to the splitting of the sea. Hey, if I wanted to compare marriage to something, the last thing I would ever use, the last word, would be splitting. It would be bonding. It would be reuniting. And yet, it's always Kriyat Yamsuf. It's always about the splitting of the sea. Isn't that like the worst example when you'd want to talk about marriage? And yet the Torah uses that as the Great Mashal for a husband and a wife coming together in the great holy matrimony of Borei Olam. How do you understand this? And the answer is an incredible answer. And here's where our words begin tonight. The words of the Arizal HaKadosh. Writes the Arizal HaKadosh. People, they read that Gemara, Masechet Sotah, and they heard this concept that's called Zivug Sheni, and they get nervous. Uh-oh, did I end up with the right one? Says the Arizal, you got it all wrong. Yes, I know what the Rashi says there. I'm tonight telling you what the Arizal writes. He says, do you know the way Hashem makes a shidduch between husband and wife? He goes to the great hotel of souls, the Neshamot in heaven, and he takes a magnificent soul and he cracks the soul in half. He splits them, two halves of one whole. He takes these two halves, says the Arizal, and he sends them both down to earth. One half on one side of the world, the other half on the other side of town. Two halves of the same soul sent down at different times in different places of the world. And now we play a game of hide and go seek. They walk by each other, they have no idea. Sometimes they could have gone even to school on the same bus, on the city bus every day. One sitting in the back, the other one sitting in the front. They have no idea. Two halves of one soul walking by each other so many times, not knowing that one day I'm going to find the one that's going to complete me. The one that's my better half, my only half. And at that moment, Hashem decides, here is the moment in time, not a second before, nor a second later. Hashem brings these two halves of one magnificent soul together. And at that moment, you meet the person and something happens. It's like something magical. It's like you look at the person, you say, don't I know you from somewhere? Haven't we met before? It's like I met you for 5 minutes, but it's like I know you for ages. And in truth, you do. You know this person for ages. You started with this person in the cosmos as one of one magnificent whole. And then you were split in Shamayim and then brought back down to this world to re-find each other. Ladies and gentlemen, please take one word tonight from me. Hashem did not put you and your husband together. Hashem put you and your husband back together. And once you know that, you got the mafteach, the master key to life, to it all. Because then there's never a question of, hey, wait, are we meant? Says the Arizal, that's why it's called Zivug Sheni. In Shamayim, when you started out as the original soul before God cracked it in half, that was the Zivug Rishon. But then he cracked it in two pieces and sent one half down to one side of town, the other half down to the other side of town. And now these two halves have to come back and reunite for the second time. Hence the term Zivug Sheni. Or in English, we would call that round two. Don't I know you from somewhere? Haven't we met before? And the answer is yes, we have. And it's a pleasure to find you and meet you again. Hashem puts husband and wife back together. And now they're ready for life. And that is why our marriage is compared to Kriyat Yam Suf. Because when Hashem split the sea, he demonstrated what he did in heaven to our soul, and then he put them back together. And that is the real lesson of Kriyat Yam Suf in marriage. And if you believe that, you'll never have a question about the person that Hashem allowed you to be reunited with and to re-find, to spend a lifetime on a mission with, two halves of a magnificent soul. Just as the sea split and went back to being one body of an ocean, our neshamot were split and we come back to be one body, one marriage, one soul. And that's what we're celebrating tonight. We have a lot of questions that come around this point, but the celebration of tonight is the reunification of a husband and a wife, two magnificent souls that found each other and on a journey and a mission together. And therefore, before I go on, I'd like to just say to the two of you, welcome back. Do you know that when Hashem created Adam and Chava, according to one tzad of the Gemara in the 9th Perek of Berachot, Hashem made Adam and Eve du partsufim. What that means is that there was one body with two heads, as if Adam and Chava were both attached back to back. like Siamese twins in a way, where there was one body with a head looking forward and a head looking backwards. And then only later on, says the Gemara, did Hashem decide to put Adam to sleep while Chava was attached to his back as one body. And then Hashem, so to speak, surgically divided them into two. Asks the Vilna Gaon, this is so odd, when it came to the animals, Hashem created a male and a female separately. He created the lion and the lioness separately. When it came to any other animal, no matter what animal you look at, there was the male and the female species that were created separately. All of a sudden, when he comes to create the greatest of all living things, mankind, he decides to create the male and the female as one body with two heads, and only later on he makes them go to sleep and he surgically divides them, and only later do they become independent? Why would he do that? Answers the Vilna Gaon a brilliant answer. He says, by the animals, when the female goes out to hunt, she hunts for herself. She has no care, nor feeling for the hunger of the male. She goes out and gets her food, and the lion is on his own. If he wants supper, he has to go out and fetch it himself. She comes home with food for herself and her cubs as a good mother, but her husband, he has to go and feed himself. They're two independent beings. Because of that, Hashem B'dafka created man and woman as one body. Because he wants her and him, even after they were separated to be independent, to still remember that they started out as one entity. And when he's hungry, she feels it. And when her head hurts, he feels it. And when she has certain emotional ups and downs, he's going to know about it. Because they were meant to be one of a kind, where they can feel each other. They can feel each other's needs. They can feel each other's pain. The only way for a man and a woman to be able to feel each other in such an intimate way is to be created together originally as one body and one soul. And then later on, separated to go about and do their jobs. That is the beauty of what a marriage is really about. It's not just a husband and wife living together. It's a husband and wife feeling together. Where everything that's going on in your world is my weight. And everything that's going on in my world is your burden. And together we carry it from the get-go until Ad Mea Ve'esrim. Now I know, ladies and gentlemen, you're looking at me and saying, Rabbi, we're married for quite a few years and this sounds like a Sheva Berachot. I get it. Believe you me, I'm doing this for a reason, because what I'm about to tell you now is nowhere in the realm of Chatan and Kala. But I could not tell you what I'm about to tell you now unless I told you what I just told you. So please open your hearts and hear what I want to tell you. This shidduch that Hashem put together when you met your husband, when you met your wife, was not just for the moment that you met each other. And yes, we already said that Hashem didn't put husband and wife together. He put husband and wife back together. But let me explain to you what that means. It doesn't just mean, like the Vilna Gaon said, that you literally are two halves of a whole, and therefore you can feel every little bit of life that the other one is going through, and you can feel their pain and their hunger and their emotions. That's just one part of it. But there's another part of that. And that is that you were meant to be one. And tonight I'd like to talk about the rule of the number one. This is the most important rule in marriage. You break this rule, you'll hear about it. You keep this rule, and you'll be emulated by all people around you with blessed children and a home that everyone would only want to aspire to create. The rule of number one is the number one rule of marriage. And what is that? It's the rule and the secret that we learned from none other than the greatest Jew that ever lived, Moshe Rabbeinu. Now, could you imagine? We're about to learn a rule of marriage from Moshe Rabbeinu, the one that spent very little time at home. You would think for a minute that would be the last place to learn exactly the most exemplary, magnificent marriage. And yet, open your hearts. I'm about to tell you something now that I'm hoping will do for you what it did for so many that went into this concept with such a beauty. The rule of the number one is the number one rule of marriage, and that means that your husband, your wife, is your number one. You know what that means? That means that nobody comes in front of them. They are the number one, period. In the beginning, when a guy is young and he gets married, so he has stuff like, boys' night out. You even mentioned that to your wife and look at the look on her face when she hears about boys' night out. Now, why does she have an issue? What does she care? She's with you every single night for years. She can't give away one night for you to go out with your friends. What's the big deal? And the answer is it has nothing to do with the night. It has nothing to do with the meal. And it has nothing to do with anything but, what about me? You going out with your friends? I thought I was your number one. Was I replaced? A spouse will never play second fiddle to anyone. And I want to tell you, sitting in the seat of rabbinate for some 20 years in the Syrian Lebanese community, and sitting over many, many good and young couples who came my way, crying, calling the rabbi and saying, help! Help us with our marriage. What happened? Where did we go wrong? And when we sat down and we put the details on the table, 9 out of 10 times, it always came back to somebody who broke this rule. Somebody didn't give the vibe to their spouse that they come first in front of everybody else in the world. Sometimes it's a mother. Sometimes it's friends. Sometimes it's a job, a business, where the wife turns to a husband and says, who are you married to? You remember me? And would you believe, ladies and gentlemen, sometimes it could even be big chidush, children, believe it or not. Constantly, husband and wife is testing each other's waters, trying to figure out, am I still your number one? Am I still your number one? Did anyone come in front of me? Did I fall down to slot number 2 or 3? Am I playing second fiddle to anyone else? If a guy would only know, so many times I'm asked, how come she calls me 4 times a day? And I try to explain to the husbands, it's not about the milk she's asking you to bring home. It's not about telling you who it was that she got into a spat with that day. And it's not about what took place with her mother the night before. It's really about, read between the lines. Am I still your number one? And constantly we have to give each other a certain feeling of reassurance. You're my number one, and nobody comes in front of you. And I'm ready to drop the world for you. And as long as we have that certain feeling between husband and wife, that the husband knows that his wife is his number one, and she can feel it. Nobody comes in front of her. Not his mother, not his family, not his business. And she feels, my husband is my number one, and nobody comes in front of him. Not her friends, and not her iPhone. At that moment, you have a marriage. You have a husband and a wife that not only was reunited and brought back together, but they remain as one. And if I may say this with certain siyata d'shmaya on the words, where it needs to be said, but it has to be said properly, even intimacy is a reassurance to your spouse that there's something between us that is so unique that nobody else can compare, and that reminds me that I'm still your number one. And that's what we learned from Moshe Rabbeinu. Could you imagine? From Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu was the one that taught us. Get ready for this. Moshe Rabbeinu, at a certain point in life, ended up splitting from his wife. And that was the moment that Aharon and Miriam began to speak about Moshe Rabbeinu. And Miriam was complaining. Moshe, why did you split from your wife? We're Nevi'im. You're a Navi. Moshe Rabbeinu. Hashem would appear to Moshe out of nowhere at any time. And because of that, Moshe said, if I would be in a tent with my wife and suddenly I would get Hashra'at Shechina of Borei Olam, how difficult that moment would be. Because of that, he split from his wife. Said Miriam, but we're also Nevi'im. And she started to complain. Do you know what she missed? She didn't realize that Moshe and Sipporah, their marriage was so magnificent that Moshe knew he was Sipporah's number one. And Sipporah knew that Moshe Rabbeinu was her number one. They were so in sync. They were so unified that they didn't even need a physical relationship anymore to constantly remind each other that we are each other's number one. He was able to go to the Ohel Moed and she was able to live in the tent, and they had a better marriage than most people you ever met. That's a fantastic chidush. This is the rule of the number one, and it's the number one rule of marriage. But Rabbi, you don't get it. My mother, she cooked Friday night, and she told me we have to come. Yeah, but your wife is not feeling well. I know, but what am I going to tell my mother? It's not what you're going to tell her. It's what are you going to tell your wife when she feels that she's now second fiddle. Nobody can come in between home team. There's a home team. There are two halves of a magnificent whole that was brought back together by Borei Olam in the way of Kriyat Yam Suf, where originally they were split apart and then they were brought back together to be unified as a perfect soul, a perfect whole. And that was meant to be the number one person in your life. And nobody comes before that person. Yes, you're in the middle of $100 million closing. And you're in a posh office, in a skyscraper, in one of these Trump magnificent buildings in New York City, and you're surrounded by the prestigious lawyers, and you're about to sign, and suddenly the phone rings. And you know who's calling. And you pick up the phone, and you say, honey, listen, I'm in a very big meeting. I can't really talk, but I just wanted to pick up for a second to tell you, I wanted to hear your voice. I wanted to say hello. Let me finish up in a few. I'll call you back in an hour. That's a husband that let his wife know that no matter what I'm in the middle of and how important the things I'm right now involved in, but nothing comes before you. And the minute she feels that, she'll stop calling. Because she got the validation that she needs from a husband. And vice versa is true as well. When a husband comes home at night, he makes a big deal about the supper, not just because he's tired, not just because he's hungry, because he wants to feel, I worked today so hard for you. I worked today to give you the best life I can give you. I want to see that in return, I mean something to you. And what I killed myself for today is something hashub in your eyes. And I really hoped that when I came home, you were around. You were around and you were waiting for me. Because that makes me feel like you're number one. If this rule would just be beholden, we would never have a moment of doubt. And it would constantly remind us that Hashem did not put me and my wife together. Hashem put me and my wife back together as one, as each other's number one. And there's no question in the world. Do you know the secret of how to do this? The secret is love is blind. Put focus on the love and put blind on all the things that you think the other person gets on your nerves. Love is blind. Put focus on the good, on the love, and put blind on all the shortcomings of the person you know and focus on their good. And it's so difficult. Most of the time, it takes more effort to close an eye to what you don't think is good than to put focus on what you think is great. But if you could just focus on that good and see that person for your number one, and don't allow anyone in the world to get in front of you and that person, and they feel it, that no one comes before them, and vice versa, that's the moment you found a marriage for life. And this doesn't matter if you're 20, 30, or 67. This rule is prime until ad mea ve'esrim. You know, Hashem has his ways. And when I was in second grade, I came into yeshiva one morning, and a very close friend of mine, Yoshua, he runs up to me and he says to me, Duvi, we're not going out to recess today. I said, what? What do you mean? I brought my football. At those days, second grade, football was my life. What do you mean we're not going to recess? He said, no. This is an emergency. What's the emergency? Today, when I was leaving to yeshiva, my mother went to the hospital. I said, oh my gosh, is everything okay? He says, yeah. Everything's okay. I said, so what's the emergency? What's the matter? Why'd she go? No, she's okay. Just when I left, she went to the hospital. She's going in to give birth today. Oh, mazal tov, mabruk, beautiful. So what's the emergency? He says, don't you get it? I said, no. I have 4 sisters. I said, yeah, okay. Don't you get it? I said, no. He said, my mother just went in to give birth. If I have another sister, I'm done. They drive me out of my mind. We got to pray today. We got to daven. It's going to be a boy. I need a brother. I'm done. I said, seriously? He says, yes. I said, okay. Wow. That's a code red, I guess. Later on that day, recess comes around, and me and Yoshua stay in the classroom. Everybody goes out with my football to play ball. And I'm in the classroom together with Yoshua. We pull out our Tehillim, and I remember it on the desk, and we're shaking back and forth. And we're saying, Hashem, I'm telling you, Kolot Ubrakim, we were saying Tehillim with our hearts, Hashem, help him. Help him. He needs a brother. We were davening, please. He has 4 sisters. 5 minutes later, the Rebbe comes walking into the class. He walks in with his signature coffee, and he looks around with a smile, and he sees the classroom is empty, but there are 2 boys shuckling away, like as if it's Yom Kippur, saying Tehillim with great kavanah. The Rebbe turns to us and he says, huh? Yoshua? Okay. Duvi, what are you doing in class, in recess? You're not outside playing football? I said, Rebbe, this is Pikuach Nefesh. He says, Pikuach Nefesh. Is everything okay? I said, Rebbe, well, to tell you the truth, Yoshua's mother went into the hospital this morning. The Rebbe says, oy vey, is everything okay? Is she all right? I said, no, Rebbe, it's all right. She went in to give birth. Oh, mazel tov, very nice. I said, no, Rebbe, you're not getting it. He says, so what's the matter? Why are you here? I said, Rebbe, don't you get it? Yoshua, he has 4 sisters. He says, okay, so. I said, Rebbe, if she has another girl, he's finished. They drive him crazy. I said, oh, I get it. You're davening for a boy. I said, yeah, Rebbe, he needs a brother. Oh, okay, go ahead, Vita, go ahead. Keep davening. So the 2 of us were shuckling back and forth, and we're praying, Hashem, send the brother to Jesse. We're davening the whole recess. At the end of recess, everybody comes back without my football. You know how these things go. Class starts. We start to learn. An hour and a half later, there's a knock on the classroom door. And there is Yoshua's father. And he comes walking in. And everyone smiles and they see him. And the whole class looks at him and says, well, no? And he has this big smile. And he says, it was a girl. And the whole class went, oh. And I remember in second grade jumping out of my desk and saying, what? What do you mean? I gave up my recess. I prayed that. What do you mean? Well, P.S. It was a girl. And they named this little girl Naomi. Well, P.S. today, her name no longer is Naomi Son today. Her name is Naomi Bensoussan, my wife. Could you imagine if it was a boy? Hashem knows what he's doing. Listen to me, ladies and gentlemen. Just when you thought you had it all figured out, just when you thought you were praying, Borei Olam, Hashem says, do me a favor. I'm the one who cracked you in half in heaven. I'm the one that brought you down. I'm the one that brought the two of you back together. I'm the one that gave you a beauty and a chen to each other's eyes, that the moment you met, you felt like you knew each other forever, and you will know each other forever, as long as each one is the number one of each other. Ladies and gentlemen, my beracha to you is the blessing that Hashem is Ehad, and our marriage should always be Yachid, Miyuchad, and Echad, between one and another. Thank you for listening.